So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate. So with regard to stimulus, let's talk a little bit initially about what that means when we hear that word. So generally, when we talk about stimulating the economy, you're talking about getting people spending money, getting them back in the restaurants, getting them back in the movie theaters, getting them back in the workplace, and to spend money and juice the economy up, right? So that the economy is running, that jobs are being created, and thus forth. I would contend that what we are experiencing right now, this COVID-19 induced recession, differs in some very significant ways from the Great Recession of a little more than 10 years ago and the tech bust in early 2000. So with those recessions, and particularly with the Great Recession in mind, the goal was to, and I think rightfully so, to stimulate the economy. When you and I as consumers aren't spending money, that has a depressing effect upon the economy. But we're looking at something different. And the 2008 Great Recession should not be the template for dealing with this COVID-19 induced recession. We're looking at now not just an economic problem, but we're looking also at a public health problem. And so we have this combination of economic distress as well as a public health, this public health issue. And so rather than start talking about stimulating the economy, I would argue that the first thing that we need to do in crafting any type of response to the current situation is that we have to protect the health and safety of our folk, and that everything ought to flow from there. It ought not to flow initially from, well, let's get people back into the tattoo parlors or the barbershops or the hairdressers and in the restaurants, right? We need to start with the basic proposition that we are called to protect and defend the health and the welfare of our people. So what that means to me is that rather than trying to encourage people or compelling people to re-enter the labor market, that at least initially, our task is not to get people to re-enter the labor market, but to keep people out of the labor market.
Oh, wow.
And to provide protection for those who are already in and have no other choice, to see themselves as having no other choice but to continue to participate. The problem in getting this type of thing across is that our representatives, as well as many of us, we worship gross domestic product, right? So the big thing is that you always have to have the economy now who are telling people, hey, let's reopen the economy, get you back in there, are people who are acutely concerned with gross domestic product. Now, understand, I'm not arguing that gross domestic product, GDP, I'm not arguing that it is unimportant. I am arguing rather that it is an insufficient metric for measuring our economic and our social progress. And so the first thing that I will argue is that rather than forcing people to go into the labor market, we need to continue to practicing social distancing, but we have to make it possible.
So Doc Greene,
yeah.
To jump in there, so like you were about to pivot to a question that I was about to ask, and I think that may be on everyone's mind, right? It's like, understand, like my own brother, right? He's been furloughed. He works in a factory out in Ennis making those Sterilite plastic tubs. And they furloughed them for a few weeks which was great with pay. But he just got found out that he has to go back to work tomorrow, right? And so there's this this idea of like, we need to keep people out of the labor market, right? And we do worship the gross domestic product, and people need to make money to take care of themselves. So how then do we, as clergy, as faith leaders, how do we enter into this, right? Dealing with the reality that both people are going to go back to work, and simultaneously we're trying to fight for an economy where people don't have to go back to work in this moment. How do we wrestle with that a little bit, from the dual roles of you being both a pastor and an economist?
Yeah, so the first thing is that, and this is really hard for, I think, a lot of people to accept, is that the first thing is that we have to recognize that for the next quarter, maybe perhaps the next 2 quarters, that there's going to be a drop in GDP. Right? And a lot of that is going to come as a result of us trying to flatten the epidemiological curve. And I think that's not a long-range strategy that's sustainable. But in the short term, I think what it means that we as pastors and, in fact, all people of goodwill, is that we have to advocate that the basic needs of people are met during this 60, 90, 100, 20 days or whatever, or however long, it might be. Folks still need to pay their rent. Folks still need to eat. Folks still need to have the lights on. And folks still need running water. And so we have to advocate and fight for that folks' basic needs are met. And when as I look at it right now, the scientific consensus seems to be that we are encouraging people to prematurely enter the labor market. Now, let me just make this one other point. So who do you think is going into the labor market in this first round? Who do you think are going to be the first round casualties? And there will be some casualties.
Tell us who they are, Doc.
Yeah, it's gonna be people, black and brown bodies and women who work in restaurants, who work in the grocery stores, who work in the service sector, that sector in which they're disproportionately represented. That they're going to be the first line casualties of a premature rush into the labor market. And so again, we have to think anew and reimagine in the short term, how can we protect our folk, and also how can we increase the level of protection and safety for those who are already in. Now, because this, if you're in the top 10% or the top 1% of the income distribution, right, this premature reopening of the economy has no direct impact on you. You're going to do what you've always been able to do.
Yeah.
Telecommute, Zoom, all that stuff. But it's at the lower end of the economic rungs who are going to feel this economic pressure to re-enter the labor market, and they will be a spike in COVID-19 cases.
So Doc, thank you for that. I want to sort of pivot to you've sort of laid out the realities, right, of the problems that we're sitting in. You know what I mean? We have an economy that was created that worships GDP. We have an economy that was created to not allow Black people to access the things that we need to survive. We have an economy that was created to not allow women to access the things that they need to survive. And so then we put Black women, right, who, like my sister, who is a home health nurse, right, who is now being pulled a million different directions and trying to do this work, and so many other Black women. So we have this economy that was set up in this way. We're into this pandemic. We're like, all right, we got to figure out a couple of things here. People are going to be going back to work, and people need to get their needs met. So one of the things that I heard you say is, one, we need to advocate on higher levels, whether it's in our city, our county, or at the state level, right, for our people to be able to get their basic needs met without actually having to go into the labor force, right? And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is, while we're doing that, we're going to have to advocate for a market, right, that doesn't make our poorest and our most vulnerable people essential workers at a moment when our country is in its worst situation. So having said that, let's talk about visioning forward, right? Like, what does this beloved economy look like? Like, if we could wave a magic wand, if we could do our work and work together along this long journey, what does it look like? And not only what does it look like, but maybe what are some things we can begin to do along the way, right, as we're trying to walk along and shepherd our people through this very, very tough time?
Well, let me talk a little bit about what it looks like. And I think Dr. Waters pointed this out earlier. You know, one of the things that this crisis has revealed, and many of us knew this already, is the presence of significant fissures along race, along class, along gender in this current economy. And that lack of health care and things of that nature made folk even more vulnerable to this current situation, right? When you lack health care, you lack affordable housing, you lack a decent wage, you lack a sick leave, you lack jobs that pay a decent wage, then what you're doing when you're not providing people with that, then you are in essence sort of removing any buffers, right, that can absorb economic shocks, right?
Can you say that one more time for us, Doc?
So when you have an economy such as we have right now, where significant numbers of people don't have access to medical care, where a significant number of people are homeless, where a significant number of people are incarcerated, and so forth, the presence of those things function as buffers against economic shocks. So, accordingly, the absence of those things, right, means the lack of buffers increases the intensity of suffering. And so we have an economy that doesn't buffer, so to speak, large numbers of people in this country. And so going forward is that we need to think about reimagining an economy that properly buffers people and that understands that people have or ought to have certain economic and social rights, right? And these rights should not be dependent upon charity, or should not be dependent upon a largesse of some individual, which is, great when they do that. But these rights need to be respected and accorded to all human beings, simply because they're human beings, and from a theological perspective, that we all are created in the image of God, and therefore our social and our economic that it reflects the protection and the promotion of human dignity.
So this is really dope. Reverend Miranda Furman dropped in. She said, right, Dr. Michael Greene, if these first return, if the people who are first returning to work fatally succumb to COVID-19, she says it actually lowers the unemployment rate and lowers the people looking for work / hiring pool, and helps this economic system that we've had, and makes the data points these leaders need to look like they're doing a good job on the economy, right? That typical voters care about. And if I can synopsize that, what I think I'm reading is Dr. Furman is saying, look, we're gonna send our poorest, our most vulnerable people back into the workplace. If they succumb to the virus, then, well, we've taken care of them, right? It's almost like if the poor die, they die. If our incarcerated brothers die, they die. If our Black women die, they die. And so it would seem then, as you were saying, that now the church, right? We as faith leaders, nonprofit organizations, we have now become the very buffer, right, that you're talking about, right? And so we're in this weird place where we're both the buffer, but we don't need to be the buffer, right? That's not what the system is set up to be. Yet we are here, right? So how then do you see us both playing the role of both being the buffer, trying to hold back as much of this as possible, or I would say, you know, to use the Noah's Ark metaphor, get as many people into the ark as possible, right? While we are also fighting upstream and making sure that our government, our local government and our federal government are doing the things they're supposed to do, so we do not have to then show up in a way that we weren't set up to show up.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think you answered the question, of giving the answer that what I would have given, and hopefully we can flesh this out more in terms of the dialogue. But here's the first thing I think is that the church community cannot be expected to bear this burden alone, right? Most states are constitutionally required to balance their budget, right? And so we need more aid to the states from the federal level. We need at the local level. There's some things that can be done that we should be advocating. For instance, with incarceration, right? You can't practice social distancing in the penal institutions. And so at the very least, we should be talking about an immediate release of, I don't know, let's say individuals who are 55 of age and over, and who have comorbidities, right? That will, make their journey much more difficult if they contract COVID-19. So there's a range of things that I think that we as pastors and as churches can be advocating and can be fighting for, but at the same time understanding that this is going to take a level of resources and a level of political commitment, right, that is going to require more than churches to deal with. Right? So it's not to say we don't do anything. We do everything that we possibly can. But at the same time, we recognize that, there's some larger, broader things happening in the overall economy that's going to require concerted action at both at the federal level, national level, local level, and the state level. And let me just say this real quick to what you were saying a moment ago in terms, and also with the issue that Dr. Miranda raised about first-line casualties. So we're sitting here and we're witnessing what I would call the politics of disposability. Right? There are some folk who are, disposable, right? And they're going to be the first ones to go into the barber shops, the first one to get the nails done, the first ones that go back to work at Amazon, often not because they want to, but because they're impelled by economic necessity. And if they were to say, no, I don't feel comfortable doing this, right? Or they tell their employer, I'm not doing this anymore. And they are let go. That person would not be eligible for unemployment benefits, right? Because you can't get unemployment benefits if you quit.
Right.
And so you see how you get a sense of the dilemma and the problems that we're confronted with, the multifaceted, and we have to talk about different ways in which to approach those things.